This podcast is brought to you by Sellacopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Sellacopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Sellacopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-Sellacopter, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@sellacopter.com. Sellacopter. List it, sell it, done.
Hello and welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. My name is Halsey Schider, and I am super excited to have my good friend and actually colleague now, Sean Moretz, joining the Helicopter Podcast. Now, Sean, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Good. Thanks, Halls. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's good to have you. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, no worries.
So this, of course, being the Helicopter Podcast, obviously you are some bit into the helicopter realm. If you would just give our audience a quick, maybe minute to 2 minute resume of Sean Moretz.
Okay. Well, pilots are usually good about talking about themselves. Sean Moretz, I've been in the industry a little over 20 years. Normal track as most American pilots. I started as a flight instructor, and subsequently after that got into Grand Canyon tours, utility, EMS, a little bit of firefighting work, power line work, worked up in Alaska for a long time, worked overseas in Angola for 7 years, and now I'm US based once again. And also been a designated pilot examiner. I knew I was talking to you, so I was trying to remember this. I think I was designated in 2004. So I've been doing that for a minute too. So yeah.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, as of now, I mean, granted, we've only had a few guests, but you are definitely the most seasoned helicopter pilot that we've had thus far.
Well, I'm sure you can do better. So that's good.
We are really excited. And that actually being said, the fact that you're a DPE, one of my goals, Sean, if you're cool with it, and as we gain a little bit of following and whatnot, we'd love to have you back on the show a couple times a year, maybe if not more, to kind of make it more of a designated pilot examiner show where our listeners can ask questions. In fact, we even have the ability to live stream these. So maybe in the future, you could kind of be our in-house DPE expert and help people with some of that check ride anxiety, so to speak.
That could be fun. There's a certain stigma with examiners, one that I usually don't agree with. It's funny how people act around DPs. I think for everybody's benefit, if they know what to expect and were more relaxed, maybe it would just be a better process for everybody. So that might be good.
How does it, I mean, so obviously you still have to do check rides within your companies and companies that you've worked for and things like that. What's different for you kind of coming at it from a DPE perspective? I mean, do you still get those check ride jitters, or is that just like so far in the past?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good question. I was singing the same tune for the longest time. Like, I've been in the industry a long time, and I remember one year when I was in Las Vegas, like I was a new DPE and I was a check airman, and I was also on a 135 certificate, and I think I took 13 check rides that year. Like, I took the check rides. So I always said, since then, I'm like, I'm over it. Like, check rides are check rides. You prepare and you show them what you got. And as long as the person evaluating you is easy to deal with, it usually goes well. I had, but then just last year, after getting out of Africa for about 7 years, I had a 135 observation with the FAA and a Bell 407 GX. It's the first time I'd felt nerves like 10 years, but they were still there apparently. I thought they were long gone. And I even knew the FAA representative. So I just think it's about managing it and coming in prepared, and a certain level of confidence helps. But I think the big thing is if you know what the process is, like, okay, he's going to ask me this on the ground. I know we have to cover these maneuvers in flight. I think that's what creates comfort for me, at least, and it should for most other applicants. People, especially applicants that I give check rides to, if it's a new flight school, they always come and they'll give me a call ahead of time, like, okay, what do you really like to focus on, or what are you looking for with this maneuver? And my answer usually is, just the practical test standards, the PTS.
Sure.
And I know that's a very vanilla answer, pretty cookie cutter, but it's true. Like if you have a DP that, uses that as, their baseline, which they're required to, you should know what to expect, and that should make you feel comfortable.
Yeah, it really shouldn't be a secret. In fact, when I was teaching at Hillsboro back in the day, when you and I first met, in fact, I have taken a check ride with you, and I have to say, if I could rewind back to that real fast, I did 2 check rides with you in one day. I did my instrument and my double I, and at that point, you and I had been working in regards to, I was actually in charge of scheduling your check rides probably for at least a year. Yeah. So we had a bit of a good relationship built up. I think I was also still in the mode where I wasn't making very much money. So I think you were even like, hey man, I know you have to do 2 check rides in a day. Like, I'm going to help you out. So thank you for that. By the way, yeah. I don't know if you remember that. But
well, you made me a lot of money. So I think that was fair. That's tit for tat.
That was a very solid move. But even though I had known you and we had Blazer basketball in common, Duck football in common, yeah. we were definitely buddies, maybe even drinking buddies at some point.
At some point, I'm sure that happened. It might have happened.
I still came into the check ride nervous, and it was just kind of funny. And I do have to say, I remember is we got in there, you opened up the PTS, and you literally actually started writing down some of the objectives. Like, okay, here, we're going through the oral portion of the PTS, and here's what we're going to cover. Mm-hmm. Here's what your flight's going to look like. And I remember appreciating that to the fact where after that check ride, I started doing that with my students on like a stage check. Like, hey, let's actually open up this book. Do you think that enough instructors are encouraging their students to actually fully understand the PTS? Because I have to say, I was about a 700-hour CFI at that point, and I had never actually educated my students on the PTS. Is that something that's common, or is that just me being crappy?
No, that's very common. I mean, it's a required it's a required book to have for the practical test on my side and the applicant side. And, it's a pretty standard joke on the DP in the DP circles, but you see this PTS on the other side of the table and it still has the plastic wrapper on it. You're like, okay.
So I'm not alone.
No, it's very, and I always, I kind of sing the same song. If I see that, or if I see a level of unfamiliarity with it, I do like, this is the test. Why wouldn't you want to know that? As the certificates progress, you go from private to commercial, especially the CFI. When I have a CFI applicant, they have to show me the PTS and take me through what the required tasks are. And that's where we start. So they literally lead me through the check ride. But yeah, it's very common. It's much more common in a 141 program because they have their TCO and their course guidance, which, is accepted, and it's kind of their baseline. But even on the Part 61 side, when you have an applicant, they're still fairly unfamiliar on the whole. So that's something, if you read the document and you look at it correctly, figure out what its use is, going back, it should make you more comfortable. This is the test. I can do this.
Yeah. It's kind of like the answers prior. It's like the ASA test prep almost for the practical side.
Yeah, it's the cliff notes for the check ride. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I do agree. I think that not all DPEs are created equal either. I think that some are probably a little bit better at making an already kind of uncomfortable situation or nerve-wracking situation a little bit more bearable. But part of me almost thinks like it's important to kind of keep that intensity up because, at the end of the day, flying a helicopter or aircraft of any sense is a complex deal. So, I mean, you want to probably make people feel comfortable, but you also have to keep that intensity. How do you make that happen?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, all DPs are different, and that's a blessing and a curse. I think it's good for any pilot that's going through their aviation career to take practical tests from different DPEs. We all have different emphasis items or ways to ask questions, different scenarios that we can create for the practical test. But yeah, I mean, we all do it different. So that's why, you find a DP you like, you want to do every test with him or her because you get it. And you don't have to go through that uncomfortable get to know you period.
Sure.
The intensity, I agree. Once again, every DP does it different. I kind of look at it once again on a certificate basis. If I've got some private pilot applicant, it's their first check ride, I mean, when they come into a check ride, they haven't slept as well as they should. They're stressed. Hopefully nothing else is going on in their life. I mean, they're kind of, they're kind of an out of body experience almost, like where you can tell they're not catching every word you're saying. So DPs have a duty. It's actually in our guidance, in the pre-brief, we have to literally, it says, quote, we have to put the applicant at ease. So like it's literally in our guidance, and some people emphasize that or take it more seriously than others. With a private, I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that they can USA, they can breathe, they're in the room, they're not having an out of body experience. And then as we go to higher level certificates, a commercial pilot, that's someone that can fly for compensation or higher. Some level of seriousness and being a little bit more challenging in your demeanor.
Sure.
That's also, it depends on the person and individual, like anything, but that's something that is, understandably used as you go higher. And the CFI, here in the United States, that's the ticket right there. That's the one. That's why the check ride's so long. It's so thorough, and it should be very serious. You can have your laughs and put the guy or gal at ease, but there's a pretty awesome responsibility inherent with that certificate.
Sure. And when I was at Hillsboro and I ended up doing the CFI stage checks, I took those ones like real serious. Like, I wanted it to be educational for the student taking the stage check, but I was trying to also make the stage check harder than the actual check ride, and actually show like the seriousness. Because at the end of the day, 200-hour CFI flying with a brand new student. I mean, the saying's true. It's the blind leading the blind. And typically you're in a Robinson product, which I love Robinson. I have no problem with Robinson, but it's a helicopter that can bite you if you're not ready for it. Low inertia, underslung, all the factors that just make it even more intense. I mean, there's seriously a lot riding on it. So, it's good that you guys are taking a good serious look at these applicants. Now, to transition a little bit away from that, and to go into this Robinson topic, because I know it's very heated debate amongst the industry. What are the airframes that you have flown consistently beyond Robinson?
Yeah, well, besides Robinson, I have a lot of Bell time, a lot of Bell products. My initial tours were out in old 206Ls and 206Bs. Moved up to the 407 from there. I've done EMS work in Bell 222s and 230s. And then my company that I worked for overseas, those were all twin engine Bells. They had 427s, 430s, and 412s. So those are all those. So I've flown a lot of Bells, flown the MD-500 for quite a bit of my utility time up in Alaska and doing power line work. A little bit of S-61 time. Bell 429 time. I think if you took about 2/3 of the ones I worked in, a good clip would be Bell products.
So, I mean, you've flown a lot of big iron, twin engine. Obviously, you're really experienced. I know that from just knowing you. But then you go back and you're flying, and I talked to you yesterday. I think you were flying in an R-44, doing a checkout for a CFI.
Yeah, a 141 check. Yeah,
a 141 check. And so, I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, and there's a lot of Robinson hate out there, and we don't necessarily have to go there, but you're obviously doing something right because you're flying with private pilots, commercial pilots, CFIs, guys that have a ton of experience. What do you do you've been doing this for, since 2004, essentially. What are some of the things that you do to ensure your safety? Because I think truly that's what it comes down to with the Robinson product is, the machine's not necessarily going to fail you, but you can definitely make some pilot errors or not be ready. So what are some things that you've done to help keep you safe?
Well, big question, but it's a good question. I mean, proficiency and just maintaining a certain level of seriousness with whatever aircraft type you fly, I think it'd be paramount. Like, I could easily make fun of that R-22 that I jump into every week when I go and do a private check ride or whatever. It's an 800-pound flying lawn chair with a low inertia rotor system, but
what could go wrong?
It can kill you. Any airframe, any aircraft can.
Sure.
I've then that's just a mentality thing and not being judgmental, but you do see people with 10-year experience, more experience than I have by far, that flown, maybe type 1 or large heavy lift aircraft. They get in anything smaller, maybe they don't take it as seriously. Even if you jump in from a Sky Crane to a Bell 430, that's still a complex aircraft in a lot of regards, and it has a lot of things that can bite you, like FADEC failures and all that. So if you don't respect the aircraft, if something gets pear-shaped, it might not respect you enough to give you good outcomes. I just think, I think those kind of things can't be taken for granted, and taking every airframe seriously. Like, I used to fly a lot of different ones, and, to maintain just proficiency and currency on every airframe and the emergency procedures and just the general limitations of what you can and can't do with it was taxing. You fly a smaller number of airframes, you can really hone into those, and you really have no excuse. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that actually kind of goes into this theme. I read an article the other day. I think we actually posted it on the Sellacopter Facebook page. It was just about what a professional aviator is. Mm-hmm. And, I think sometimes people think, well, I'm getting paid, so I'm professional. But really, professionalism extends in everything that you're doing in aviation. How prepared you are with EPs, how prepared you are with the check ride. For me, I mean, I'm a bit, I guess, not an egomaniac, but I like to do well and be the best at times. So like when I go into a check ride, I always try to prepare for that, and I fall short. I've definitely had, especially on the ground side where it's like, ooh, I could have probably studied a little bit harder or whatnot, but sure. I'm always trying to bring that professionalism in. So I think it kind of to what you're saying is that no matter what airframe you're in, you should always kind of have a professional mindset. And that's the mindset that's hopefully going to keep you safe, specifically when you're transitioning through different aircraft constantly, and slowing down, probably reminding yourself, oh, I'm in a long ranger today, don't twist the throttle like a B model, or whatever it might be.
Well, I mean, being a professional pilot can be as easy or hard as you want it to be. Once you get qualified for an airframe and the job becomes routine, you can sit on your laurels. You can just get ready for your check ride once a year, and do the death by CTS stuff. But if you just spend a little bit more time getting to know the aircraft and stuff, it keeps you engaged, maybe even makes you like your job a little bit more. But yeah, different folks can approach that differently. But that and doing horrible on a check ride sucks. It's the most demoralizing thing. I mean, we've all had those days where you could have done better. I know personally, sure. I beat myself up way longer than the check ride lasted if I had a marginal day. So that's always fun to avoid too.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I've always kind of felt like it's my responsibility to police myself. I mean, very much, when you're a pilot, you're kind of potentially a little bit of on an island. Like if you're doing EMS, you don't have too much direct oversight. Your boss isn't necessarily breathing down your throat or your back all the time. So, policing yourself and keeping you up and kind of maintaining your own standards should be hopefully an industry-wide practice. I'm not always sure it's the case, but, hopefully it is. Well, you mentioned earlier that you were flying in Africa. I know that you and I have talked about this before. It's been actually a while. How long did you work there?
I think it was about 7 years. Horrible dates. I think it was close to 7 years. Yeah. And when I say that, I always have to. I wasn't in Africa for 7 years. Like any gas and oil job, there's a rotation. So I traveled I was in Angola specifically. I traveled to Angola. And I was on what they refer to as a 28 and 28. So it'd be 28 days on camp. And then once I left camp, my time off started and I'd have 28 days away from camp. So the travel days fit into your off time, but yeah.
How long is the travel to Africa?
For US pilots, it's not awesome. You'd usually red eye out. So I'd go from Dulles over usually to Frankfurt or to Portugal, and you would usually get in there and you would basically red eye out from there. So by the time you got, and then from Europe, you would go down to Angola. We'd land in Luanda, the capital. From there, we jump on a Dash 8. We'd go up to the northern province, And then from there, we take about an hour bus drive. So by the time you got to camp, you'd even know who you were. You were pretty banged up, but it's a 2-day and change affair. Lots of jet lag. Some people handle it better than others. Yeah.
Jet lag, and man, I think if you're traveling that long too, like I feel like my ankles would start to swell or something.
I wore compression socks, bro. Always. Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, even like sometimes just going like, Oregon to New York, kind of
both flights are about 8 to 9 hour legs, which it's not like you're going from Australia or anything. Those guys have it the worst, but still, it's a lot of time in the metal tube for sure.
Yeah. How did you adjust? I mean, so like for me personally, my last full-time flying position, I was working air medical, and full disclosure, I had a hard time adjusting to the night hitch. I worked air medical for over 2 years. I really enjoyed the job, enjoyed the company I was at, but for me and just me as a person, the way I operate, I had the hardest time acclimating myself to this, wake up at 3 a.m. and go fly a helicopter thing. Yeah. I know it's different on this travel, but to me, that seems crazy. Like your whole world is upended every other month. I mean, did it take a long time to get accustomed to that?
Yeah, like I said, it's different for everybody. For me personally, it was easier going there. I don't know why. Most people disagreed with me that I worked with, but you'd get there around lunch, and the move was to just power through and not take a nap. And try and make it to bedtime, and then you would get a full night's sleep and you'd be fairly competent the next day. But even when we were in camp, we had day and night shifts. We had a night medevac part. So you could come in and work 3 days and then go over into night. So it takes a lot of, to me, it was discipline, like knowing what schedule works for you, finding the schedule first, and then sticking with it. On the way home, I mean, that's where I'm horrible. Like my wife just writes me off for about 48 hours when I get back. I'm not firing on all cylinders, just a little slow on the take up. Just the food's different, everything. I was usually pretty worthless when I got back home for a couple of days.
What's the time difference? If you said it, I'm sorry.
I think it's 5 to 6 average. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like huge, but even like, I don't know, man, you go back, like, I'm in Texas now, go back to Oregon, it's a couple hours, visit family. Like it's wrecks me for a couple of days. Like I'm just like I'm a sensitive guy, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, some people just think I would be a joke too. Yeah. It's +6 right now, but some people it doesn't bother at all, or at least they don't complain about it. I guess I'm a wuss, but yeah, a lot of people, like, you got to know how to treat it.
I mean, 7 years, I don't know, like, as far as tenure there, I mean, was there guys that had been there for longer than 7 years?
Yeah.
Or were you, like, pretty high up on the totem?
Well, I mean, when I came and when I left, there were still some of the same people there. So there has been some people there that were easily over a decade there. The big thing about the pilot pool in Angola is it's an international pilot pool. Us Americans, we have more options for employment. A lot of the pilots were South African based. And honestly, when I was at Heli Malongo, it was probably the best paying job on the continent. Like everybody wanted to work there, especially the South African guys. It's right up the road, easier commutes, and it paid nice.
Yeah. And so that was the whole thing. Like it was kind of a mixture of American based or even European based pilots flying with African-based pilots?
Yeah, good question. So basically, we flew for Chevron, but we were an Angolan aviation company. And so international pilot pool, we definitely had a lot of locally sourced pilots, ex-military. We've even, Heli Malongo or Chevron probably even paid for some of the younger SIC's training. And then, a lot of the PICs and captains were South African, American. We had Brazilians, we had Frenchmen. I mean, it was a fun mix of guys. But yeah, it was, as time goes on, they're able to qualify more local pilots, which of course that's what their main goal was. So I think they've done a pretty good job of that.
And the primary mission was, like you said, oil offshore, and there was kind of an air medical portion.
Yeah, gas and oil support, mostly a day VFR operation. But they also had standby night medevac for any issues that occurred offshore, and they did that with their 412. and they would fly offshore for any medevacs with qualified medical personnel and stuff like that.
And what was the fleet that was being operated?
That was all Bells. It was Bell 427, 430, and Bell 412s. When I got there, it was a pretty big fleet. I think they had 12 or 13 airframes operating. It was, I mean, to me, it was good size. It was pretty busy.
Wow. And you ended up, weren't you a check airman?
Yeah, after a couple of years, I got in the training department, and I was one of the company check airmen. So that was nice. That kept me busy. If you're just a basic line pilot, depending on how busy it was, what time of year, the state of the oil industry, at least that kind of kept the gears turning. So I enjoyed the training department. So
did you do more training flying then and less of the kind of the day-to-day, A to B platform type stuff?
Ratio-wise, I mean, I still flew the line a lot. So the check airmen and instructors usually had, like, they would fly the line for a half day, and any rides they had to do for giving check rides for the pilots to keep their currency, I would do, the later part of a day, stuff like that. So it was kind of a nice variety. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. That's awesome. I don't know. 28 days, that would be tough. And was there any time off, or is it like a straight 28?
Actually, yeah. So you would have to get your 7th day off. Or if you were going from days to nights, you would have to get a day off to reset and have your duty rest. So, yeah, you always look forward to that 7th day. I mean, Heli Malongo, that Chevron camp, when I went there, it wasn't that bad. They had a little 9-hole golf course, which I didn't partake in. They had tennis courts, a gym. Later on, like halfway through my employment, like we were able to get Wi-Fi stuff for our room. We had little modems and stuff we could carry around. So it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad.
And this is slightly, I mean, I guess you worked there in the age of streaming, so you definitely probably at least had some Netflix and hangout moments.
So the first 5G I ever used was in Angola. It's still better than any internet I've used there in the US, but it's expensive. So usually you'd download a bunch of movies before you left the States, and you'd have all your books and all your movies and all the stuff you wanted to do.
Kind of just preload it.
Yeah, people usually kept pretty busy. Lots of guys had video games. One guy I know finished his college degree while he was there. So
it's like people are playing Xbox and this guy's getting his PhD. It's
pretty much.
Come on.
No, it was impressive.
Rick,
he was in the pilot. He was in the pilot room doing his online courses for his business degree. It was cool.
Well, good for him.
Yeah.
I mean, similar. That's kind of how I started, selling aircraft. I felt like with the air medical schedule, working days, and then having 7 days off, it was like, man, there's a lot of free time. Even at work, if you're not flying, it was like, well, maybe there's something else I can do. And so that's when I started selling, and it just was a nice little segue. But there's also quite a bit of time where I just watched Netflix, kind of caught up on my chill. When I'm at home, I feel like even if I had 7 days off, the honey-do list, even in 7 days, grew exponentially. So I can only imagine at 28 days. The list that you would come home to.
No comment.
Would probably be pretty. No comment.
No, it's always rough. Yeah.
Maybe we won't let Sarah watch this.
Okay. No, I mean, that's true though. Like one of the main reasons I left, like a lot of guys could pull that type of job off with a family, and I just knew I wasn't going to be one of those people. So, to-do lists and all that's one thing, but just being at your own home base in the country it's nice after that long. I mean, I enjoyed my time in Angola and it served its purpose for sure, but I was glad to be home.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those potentially golden handcuffs situations because, as you alluded to, it paid really well.
Yeah.
I would say for most helicopter jobs, if I can kind of remember some of the talks that we've had over time, like, that's pay wise, some bit of a higher end, and what you think of like, man, if I can only get that job. But that's a huge sacrifice to be that far away from family, spending half of the year away. At some point, you probably do have to kind of weigh, like, am I willing to take a little bit less to have a higher quality of life?
Yeah.
And, it just, that's tough. I mean, that's a hard position. I would say it's one of the hard things of being a helicopter pilot is you do almost have to make a choice at some point of like family or, career.
Yeah.
And I chose early on. I always knew I wanted to be a family guy. So, I just figured, utility's not going to be for me. All the fun stuff. Like, no wonder I kind of burnt out, flying straight and level, kind of boring helicopter missions, so to speak. So I feel like I missed out just because of my yearning to want to, do the whole family thing. And here I am, 32. Don't have a family. I do have a puppy and a wife.
You got to start somewhere. The puppy's the first domino, I'm telling you. But no,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's, it as you stay in the industry, your perspective changes for sure. I mean, my first decade or so, I just wanted to do everything. I wanted to try everything. People are like, what do you want to do ideally? What's your perfect job? My answer was always, I don't know. I haven't done everything yet.
Sure.
So I went and I was able to check a lot of boxes. But yeah, I mean, as you get older, maybe more tired, knowing your values have changed. Yeah, getting closer to home is, it turns into a lot of guys' ideal, and they'll take a hit financially if need be, in order to do that. So yeah.
So you've obviously been flying quite a bit. How many hours do you even keep track anymore?
I mean, to a certain effect. I know I'm over 8,000, but I probably need to sharpen my pencil soon and get a good number. So
yeah, tell me about it. I've always been, if anyone is out there listening, if you have a problem with if you're like me and you're like, I'll fill it out tomorrow, I'm going to tell you, you're not going to fill it out tomorrow. You're going to fill it out in like 6 months. So if I could give any advice right now, don't. I'm that guy. Like every year I'm like, gotta go to the company and ask them to print off like the flight records.
Yeah. Eats up 2 days. Yeah. Put it in your logbook.
Yeah. It's just like, oh my God.
Yeah. No, I have it all. I just haven't totaled it. Just haven't had the need. But it's,
I mean, it kind of gets to a point. Got a little shaky camera there. Sorry to my audience. So 8,000 hours. Have you had any moments that you would consider a bit of a pucker factor in that 8,000 hours? I
mean, that's a common question I get asked even during check rides when we're all done. But I mean, I've had a couple engine failures, some other issues. Nothing they were all, they all turned out well. I'm still here.
Yeah, we're here talking.
Didn't bend any metal, just knocked on the wood there. But yeah, I mean, I had one. I wouldn't say it's funny, but I did have a practical test. I was getting a check ride, a 135 check ride. Quick pilot story, because I'm a pilot. Everyone has one.
You were taking the check ride.
I was taking the check ride, and it was in a Robinson R44 Raven 2. Okay, and the check airman that was giving me the check ride was being observed by the FAA, who's in the back seat. Okay, so we got 3 people in R44. I don't know. It was out of Las Vegas, middle of June, really hot. Long story short, I could really get on my soapbox, but but we were headed out to the practice area, and the FAA guy poked the shoulder of the check airman, and he looked back, and the FAA guy went like that, like, you give him a throttle chop. And I was at cruise power. I was, head full of steam going uphill up to the practice area. And the soon-to-be check airman chopped the throttle, engine quit. Yeah, vapor lock probably. It was a fuel injection.
I was going to say hot out, vapor lock.
Got off a Mayday call, did a 180, found the side of a road, did a full down. We all got out, no damage or anything like that. And the aircraft subsequently started up right after that. It was the shortest check ride of my life, though. It was a 0.3. But
of course,
yeah, it was pretty good.
You passed.
I passed. Right? I passed. So that turned out pretty well. So but yeah, it was you're always going to have some issue in your career. It's being ready without needing to be ready. It's just training and proficiency. That's pretty obvious, but that's what needs to happen.
That would be kind of a wild. I've always kind of, thought in my head of like, man, what is that? I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm sure it's bound to happen, but I've always thought like, when is that time in my career that I'm going to have to say Mayday? Like when I'm legitimately saying Mayday over the radio, that's going to be potentially a very crazy experience. Hopefully it will end well.
Yeah.
But, I often think about that. sometimes I think about it too much. Sometimes I'll be like, like, man, is today the day, or, whatever, some silly,
kind of being negative.
That looks like my camera lost out there for a sec. Is today the day? And, sometimes you just got to put some of those anxieties aside and whatnot, but it's crazy. And I guess, you're always going to be, prepared and thinking, hey, I'm going to land here or do this or do that. But it's probably nice to actually have had some of that firsthand experience to know, like, hey, the training does work. And if you just kind of follow some basic fundamentals, even, that you can usually have a positive outcome.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And that paranoia you speak of, I mean, it's commonly known that's inherent with us rotor heads. That's something that usually pays off at some point in your career, always knowing where you go if the engine cuts out, where the winds are at. Just having that little bit of paranoia can be very, very good for you. But yeah, I mean, it's nice. Everyone's going to have their stories the longer to stay in the industry. It's cool if they end up well, and you can share that, and maybe people can teach from it. Like when I'm a DP, going back to DP stuff, just, things like if I have some commercial pilot and he's bombing out to the practice area at 500 feet with a 20 knot tailwind. We're like, hey, can you do, if the engine quit, could you pull off 180 and land in that parking lot right there? They're like, no. I'm like, well, you should probably be a little higher.
Maybe you want to up your altitude.
Might want to stack the odds in your favor so you don't have to, have that problem. So it is nice to be able to use those experiences and apply them to other people, maybe influence them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I've always tried to, when I was teaching, I think there was probably 500 hours of where I wasn't that great of a teacher because I was still learning. You were just, it's like, I remember like going and be like, oh God, I got to do a 180 now. Like, how am I supposed to teach a 180? I can hardly do a 180, and like my heart was like beating out of my chest. I'm embarrassed to say this out loud. I hope I'm not alone, but it took a long time to, gain that comfort and actually become a proficient teacher. But after teaching, what I realized and got better at is like, I want to teach my students to be proactive, not necessarily always reactive. Obviously, there's times in a helicopter where you have to react. Engine quits in an R-22, you got to react, lower the collective, whatnot. But being proactive, like, I would fly with students and they would pull, 5-minute power on their takeoff. It's like, well, yeah, you can pull that. But once you're through ETL, or say, hey, you're in a hover with a 5-knot headwind and you're at 21 inches, there's really no need to pull more than 21 inches throughout your entire takeoff profile. Yeah. Like, why don't we, kind of, like you said, stack the cards in your favor? So I hope that I wasn't the only, I'm sure a lot of, hopefully other CFIs are preaching that. Are you seeing kind of those pilots being taught at a proactive
I might
level?
be going on the fork of the road on this one, but the one thing I really see, I think the one thing that's really hard to kind of create a culture in the training environment is to really emphasize the student or applicant's decision making. I think that's usually the big thing lacking. Like, you got a private student, they're going to come into you with 50 or 60 hours with all but 10 hours, someone to sit in the left seat telling them what to do. Then they meet a guy like me and I'm like, hey, you're PIC, is the aircraft airworthy? Are we going flying? What do you think about this one? Guy's like, that's all up to them now. And I don't give them anything. That's part of the job. I can't teach. I'm not the decision maker. And for some of them, it's a big jump all in a day. They're like, oh, this is up to me. Usually they tell me if I can't fly. So I think the decision making is the one thing that's a tough one. Because honestly, as an instructor, you have to use a lot of restraint. You got to let these students go out and, dig a hole, if you will, not too far, but you got to see what their mindset is and then talk about it afterwards. But that's the big one.
You got to find that fine line. It's always hard, in the beginning, maybe you're too much on the controls and then maybe you get a little too relaxed. I know that sometimes catastrophic accidents that probably could have been prevented are the higher time CFIs, guys that, rest on their laurels. Or, I mean, I can definitely say like the students that I never thought would try to kill me were always the ones that ended up trying to kill me or hurt the helicopter, like, hey, my best autoing student, we just did 10 perfect autos and then we're about to do the 11th and he rolls on the throttle, on entry. It's like, what are you doing? It's like, out of everyone, this guy.
But then there's even smaller things, Halls. Like if you're going on a cross country with someone and your student didn't account for the crosswind, they're missing their checkpoints. give them 15 miles. Let them see what happens. They're like, what are you going to do? I have no idea where we're at. So, there's different levels of it, but they can still all learn from that. Like that's kind of stuff that really sticks. So,
well, and that is especially kind of like that, hey, where are we? Like, why is there water here? Yeah. And there was no, there was no water within 20 miles of our route.
You've been looking for the same set of power lines for 15 miles. I think we missed it.
Yeah. People would ask me back in the day, like, what is it like to be a flight instructor? And I said, it's kind of like, and I had to love you, Dad, if you're watching and listening, but my dad grew up in, the 50s, 60s, whatever, not the most computer savvy. He's getting very good with his iPhone.
Awesome.
He's texting. He does one-way texting. So he'll text you. There's not always a conversation, which is fine. Lots of emojis as well. But I always kind of equate it like when I was teaching him the internet, like this Google, where he's kind of like finger picking like the keyboard, where he just wanted like, hey, let me do it for you, but then again, he would never learn how to use the internet. Right. So I always kind of said like, that's how it feels as a flight instructor. It's like this urge, like you want to just, hey, let me show you how to do it. Let me do it. Give me the controls. But if you continue to do that, then your student's going to have a really hard time really learning, those lessons, whether it's on a cross country and auto.
Sure.
And if you can do it within a safety margin, you got to let these people make mistakes for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing, just capping off the CFI stuff, I mean, CFI, it's not for everybody. A lot of people, especially like, military pilots come in the industry, they think we're all nuts flying these Robbie products. But being a CFI, I forget who told it to me, but always stuck. It's basically a license to freedom. Okay. It's your first job, and it's probably one of the only jobs you'll ever have where on a daily basis, you can be like, we're going here, we're doing this, we're going to stop here and have lunch. Like name another helicopter job where you can do whatever you want. For the rest of your career, as you go up, you have a set mission, routes, altitudes. So a CFI thing can be very enjoyable when you're not petrified. And then at some point with most, you hit the end of that road and you need to move on. But CFI can be fun when you're in the middle of it, for sure.
Oh, I loved it. I mean, there was times, I was delivering pizza. I would flight instructor in the day and deliver pizza at night to kind of make the ends meet, because it was the CFI pay and this crazy, experience. But I was young. Like it's an experience I would never trade back. And I personally feel like I became so much more of a well-rounded helicopter pilot just by being a CFI, because you get to a point where you can look back and actually see the mistakes that you were making as a student. Mm-hmm. It's like when I played football in high school, I got good and decent. I was able to start my senior year and things like that, but I was never great. And then I coached football, and I turned out to be a good coach because I could see from an outside perspective all the mistakes that I used to make. And from then you can actually correct. So if I could have gone back and played football again, probably would have even been better after I was a coach. And watching people make those mistakes in the cockpit, even though I was not hands-on or whatnot, I actually ended up becoming a better pilot. So for me personally, I'm really glad that I was a flight instructor.
Yeah, likewise. Like I said, not for everybody, but for me, it really held its value for sure.
And you've flown all over, and obviously you did a ton of check rides in Oregon. Am I biased, or I know that Oregon's a little crazy right now, so we won't even go there, but am I biased in saying that it's like some of the best flying, especially like first, like learning, like, man, the West practice area for the off airports? Does it get better?
No, honestly, when people ask me about some of the West Coast flight schools, I've been up and down the West Coast. The Oregon ones do stick out, just all the off airport LZs, in Central Oregon, and then, Hillsboro out west, it's just a playground. Yeah. And then you get to Central Oregon, you got the high DAs in the summer and stuff, which is a really good learning tool. Utah is also pretty awesome.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there's some good stuff out there. But the altitude, it's a little bit higher, so it can actually, the DA gets really up there, so it's a little bit more serious. But yeah, Oregon's great. The only thing that gets in the way on the rotorcraft side, in the valley, in the winters, if you're trying to get your IFR ticket, you can sit there for a month and not turn a blade because you don't have the ceiling. Yeah. So I've seen that more than once, and it's sad for everybody. So.
Well, it sucks as the instructor too, because you're getting paid billable. There's only so much ground. That's why I was having to sling pizza. Yeah. I was like, man, I had to just during the winter.
If you don't time out your instrument for the summer, you're hooped. It's just going to take longer than you want it to. So
Yeah, you're completely right. In fact, again, going back to your and I's check ride, we had to delay all day long for the weather to get good.
Yeah.
So we ended up doing the
happens
grounds
a lot
and
in
then
the
going,
valley
but
there for sure. Yeah.
it's crazy. Well, Sean, I really appreciate you joining the Helicopter Podcast today. If you're cool with it, I'd love to have you on here in a couple months. Hopefully we can gain a little bit of a following and get some questions, maybe kind of a ask a DPE. But I just think based off knowledge alone, it's always great to talk with someone that's been in the industry for a long time. You're still doing it. You have a good outlook on it. You know, you're not crotchety and old and bitter about it. You know, you really honestly love helicopters. I was talking to our mutual friend about it today, actually, with Brian.
Oh, cool.
And like, man, Sean just like, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like if you're not hanging out with baby Mabel and your puppies or doing your family thing, you're on the phone talking with someone within the industry about helicopters.
I mean,
it just seems like you're that guy that loves talking helicopters.
You get in the industry and you stay in it. It's just you got a good group of friends and they all do what you do. So, you know, they're guilty by association. But yeah, most days you're not far off the mark there. So.
Awesome. Well, hey, Sean, thanks so much for joining, and thank you all for listening to this edition of the Helicopter Podcast.
As always, a special thanks to Sellacopter for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, Sellacopter is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. Sellacopter's team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, Sellacopter will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text helicopter to 1-855-Sellacopter. That's helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a Sellacopter pilot agent will reach out. Sellacopter. List it, sell it, done.